Congratulations on your decision to leverage the Cerberus Sentinel Managed Vulnerability Program. Cerberus MVP makes it easy for you to automate vulnerability management workflows, providing a simple framework to get the right vulnerability intel to the right people in your organization. It's your application to analyze, monitor, and track vulnerabilities for the endpoints and applications that matter to you. If you have questions relating to the content covered in this video, please don't hesitate to reach out through established support channels. Once your project is created, you'll receive an email from noreply@nucleussec.com inviting you to the platform. Please review and save the information from that notice, as it will contain the initial login information for your account. After logging in, we're greeted with the global dashboard. This view provides the combined statistics from each of the project dashboards that you have access to. It's important to keep this distinction, global versus project layer, in mind going forward, because the data segregation between projects is central to the platform. For example, if your organization has 2 branches in separate locations, an administrator might want to provide the IT staff at branch 1 access to their own vulnerability data while providing the staff at branch 2 access to the data from both locations. When a user from branch 1 logs in, they would see a dashboard that provides data for only their own project. Users from branch 2 would see the combined metrics of both projects as a whole, and they'd be able to see more specific data for each branch by viewing the project-level dashboard for each respective location. This is configurable to a high degree. A user with admin access to one project can be provided with read-only access to a second project. Custom access scopes can be configured as well, allowing you to specify the exact functions any particular user should be able to accomplish within any project. If Azure Single Sign-On is configured for your project, these access scopes can be applied automatically based on a user's group membership. A typical MVP implementation employs only a single project, but you are free to use as many as necessary. You should also keep in mind that the global layer in Nucleus is mostly for reporting and administration. Nearly all of the work that you'll perform within the platform is accomplished at the project layer. So selecting the project that you wish to work on is almost always the first thing that you should do after logging in. After selecting a project, we're greeted with the project layer dashboard. This provides most of the same data as the global dashboard, but is filtered to only include the data for the project that you've selected. Note the navigation menu along the left-hand side of the page. Feel free to pause the video to review the function of each tab. You can also click on the descriptions next to each of the tabs to be taken to the section of this video that relates to that tab. In the video description below, you'll also find labeled timestamps, which serve the same purpose. To start, let's take a look at the Vulnerabilities tab group and select the Active tab. As the name suggests, this provides a view of all active vulnerabilities, so findings that have been completely eradicated from your environment will not be represented here. Within the table, take special note of the Discovered, Last Seen, Count, and Assets columns. The Discovered column indicates the first time this vulnerability was discovered on any devices in the environment. Last Seen indicates the last time this vulnerability was observed on any devices within the environment. Count indicates the total number of instances of that vulnerability in your environment, and Assets gives the number of devices that are affected. For example, if 2 devices were affected by the same Apache web server exploit, and both devices hosted their sites on 2 separate ports, 80 and 443, then the Asset metric would be 2, and the Count metric would be 4. To view the details of each finding, simply click the name of the vulnerability. The resulting window displays some of the general information relating to the vulnerability, including the summary, general remediation instructions, the CVSS risk score, and the Nucleus risk score. Note that the CVSS risk score can differ substantially from the Nucleus risk score. The difference occurs because, while the CVSS risk score is a useful point of reference, there are a number of factors that it does not take into account. For instance, if you had 2 devices, one of them being a user laptop and one of them being a publicly exposed web app server containing sensitive compliance-restricted information, and both of those devices had the same vulnerability finding, the CVSS risk scoring system would treat both vulnerabilities as equal in severity, when in reality the risk posed by the user laptop is far lower. On the other hand, Nucleus takes multiple factors into account, including the CVSS risk score, the data sensitivity of a device, the criticality of a device, whether the device is publicly exposed, vulnerability intelligence sources such as Mandiant, ease of exploitation, exploit pack availability, and the risk score provided by the scanner that initially discovered the vulnerability. Based on this data, the risk score of each vulnerability is adjusted somewhat, and so is the overall risk score of individual assets. The degree to which these factors influence the risk score is configurable and can be easily changed within the Risk Settings tab under the Project Administration tab group. Next, let's take a look at the Instances tab. Here you can view each individual instance of a vulnerability that you have selected. By selecting the checkbox next to the vulnerability and clicking the Change Status button in the top navigation menu, you can change the status of an individual vulnerability instance here. However, keep in mind that the status will automatically be marked as mitigated after your next scan if your remediation efforts were successful. Clicking on the Vulnerability Intelligence tab provides us with detailed insights on the vulnerability itself as well as remediation instructions. These are provided by Mandiant, an industry-leading vulnerability intelligence platform. This integration is included with all Cerberus MVP projects at no additional cost. Lastly, looking at the Tickets tab on any vulnerability will display any tickets that Nucleus has opened within external ticketing tools, if such integrations have been configured within your project. You may have noticed in the previous section within the Vulnerability Instances tab that the tab can be used to assign vulnerability instances to a specific user or team. This can be done manually or via automation rules. Once a vulnerability is assigned to a user, they will receive an email informing them of the assignment. The email will contain a summary of the vulnerability, general remediation instructions, and a link to the vulnerability page where they'll be able to find more detailed information, such as links to vendor documentation regarding the vulnerability, as well as more detailed descriptions of the vulnerability itself, including remediation guides, and enriched threat intelligence provided by the Mandiant Threat Intelligence integration. Vulnerabilities that have been assigned to your user can be found in the Assigned to Me tab. Similarly, vulnerabilities that have been assigned to a team you're a member of can be found in the Assigned to My Team tab. The Resolve tab gives a view of previous vulnerabilities that have already been addressed. Take note of the Verification Method column at the far right of the table. If an item shows full, this indicates 100% of the instances of that vulnerability have been addressed. Any findings marked with partial will contain at least one instance that has been addressed and at least one instance that has not. This page will also tell you whether the vulnerability was marked as mitigated manually by a user or whether it was automatically marked as mitigated by a scan. Anything marked as mitigated via scan was confirmed to be remediated by the vulnerability scanner itself and subsequently closed by automation. Moving to the Top Risks tab, we see another vulnerability table. A key difference between this table and the one found on the Active tab is that the Active tab has only a single line item for each vulnerability, so the instances of those vulnerabilities are grouped into a single finding. On the Top Risks tab, however, there is no such grouping. Everything in the table represents a single vulnerability instance on a single device. The purpose of this table is to help you prioritize which vulnerabilities should be receiving the most attention. The first item on the table should almost always be the item which you assign the highest priority. This page is heavily weighted to consider your most critical assets, such as publicly exposed assets, domain controllers, and other equipment that the business heavily relies on, to be prioritized more highly on the list. This is, in my opinion, one of the most foundational data sets within the platform, because it helps to ensure that your team is spending their remediation efforts in the places that will have the largest immediate impact. This is especially important for teams that don't have dedicated personnel who are responsible for tracking and remediating vulnerabilities within the environment. Next, we have the Trends dashboard. This provides a view of how impactful your remediation efforts have been over time. If it's your job to oversee remediation efforts and track progress, this page, in combination with the overall project risk score, is often the simplest method for doing so. If remediation efforts have been impactful, and you have reduced the number of vulnerabilities faster than new vulnerabilities are being discovered, then a downward trend is what you should expect. Conversely, an upward trend would indicate the opposite. Next, we have the Phishing tab. This allows you to integrate with your own know-before phishing campaign console. Once the API integration is configured within Nucleus, this table is intended to show the key metrics pulled from your know-before account. Given the fact that deficits in user training are just another type of organizational vulnerability, it may benefit you to have that data present in the tool where the rest of your vulnerability information is being tracked. Moving on to the Compliance tab group, this allows you to import active findings and user training requirements from supported compliance scanning platforms. For a list of the scanning platforms that are supported, please reach out to support, as the list is likely to change over time. Also, it's best to keep in mind that some compliance checks, such as PCI compliance adherence, can only be officially evaluated by an approved assessor. So, while certain unofficial compliance checks are included with Cerberus MVP, the primary function of these checks is to help your organization track and address compliance adherence internally in preparation for official checks. The program also includes certain unofficial configuration audits for cloud infrastructure platforms such as Microsoft Azure, the Google Cloud Platform, Amazon AWS, Rackspace, and Salesforce.com. If you'd like to know which compliance checks are supported for any of these platforms, or what kind of credentialed access the checks will require, the Cerberus MVP team is available to assist with those questions, as well as anything more specific that your team may need to ask. Contact details for MVP support will have been provided during the kickoff phase of your project. Moving on to our next tab group, Assets, we'll first take a look at Asset Management. Here you can view a comprehensive list of the devices that have been discovered during your vulnerability scans. Take note of the groups along the left-hand side of this page. Creating a comprehensive list of groups is one of the very first things you should do after creating a project. Ideally, it's best to have a group for every device category. For example, separate groups for user laptops, VDI workstations, internal servers, and externally exposed servers, domain controllers, DMZ devices, firewalls, etc. Once you've established these groups, we'll use them to categorize asset risk attributes. For instance, if you have an externally exposed servers group, then we can naturally assume that everything in that group should be classified as an externally exposed device. If you have a domain controllers group, then everything in that group can safely be categorized as high business criticality and not externally exposed. This is usually a much faster method of classifying risk attributes than doing so individually. That being said, should you wish to alter the risk attributes of a single device, you would do so by clicking the hyperlink name of the host, then clicking the Edit button in the top left of the asset page, and navigating to the Risk Attributes tab. For a brief explanation of each of these risk attributes, network exposure labels whether a device is publicly accessible over the internet or only through your internal network. Compliance labels a device as in scope or out of scope for compliance requirements of any kind. Criticality is meant to reflect how severely your business would be impacted if a particular device was compromised in terms of your continued ability to operate. And naturally, data sensitivity is meant to reflect the nature of the data that's stored on the device. Moving back to the Asset Management dashboard, we'll create an asset group as an example and move a device into that group manually. To do so, simply click the New Group button near the top of the Groups widget. Once a group is created, all that's required is to find the assets you wish to move into the group, then drag and drop them into the group folder. Note that in addition to being useful for classifying risk attributes on devices, asset groups are also useful for reporting purposes. In the Reporting tab, most report types allow you to generate reports for the entire project or to specify the groups that you want to include in the report. This allows you to do things like generating a report that only includes devices that are within compliance scope, and a second report that only includes devices that are not. Lastly, if you select the checkbox next to an asset, you can open a drop-down menu for Actions or Modify Assets. The Actions menu allows you to delete assets, merge two assets together, or set an asset as inactive. Most of the time, I recommend against deleting an asset, as this is data destructive. If you decommission a device, it's better to mark it as inactive instead of deleting it. Marking a device as inactive removes it from your license pool, so it's no longer taking up one of your licenses, and it also marks any vulnerabilities the asset had as mitigated, because decommissioning a device is a valid form of remediation. The Modify Assets menu allows you to edit the risk attributes or details of multiple devices simultaneously. Next, on the Installed Software tab, you'll see any data that has been collected from your devices regarding the software packages that each asset has installed. This data is mainly collected through authenticated scans, So you're unlikely to see a lot of data here unless you're allowing the scanner to run credential checks. On the Open Ports and Services tab, you'll naturally see a summary of the open ports and running services. This information is gathered by the scanner through both credentialed and non-credentialed checks. The tabs for SSL, TLS Summary, and Certificate Summary give a breakdown of all the certificates and encryption types that were found across the network, and the respective devices the information was gathered from. If you're phasing out specific TLS versions or replacing specific certificates, this information may be helpful to reference. Moving to the Data Ingest tab group, we'll start with the Import via File tab. This page allows you to upload raw vulnerability results manually. A list of the supported file types can be seen on the right-hand side of the page. Depending on your deployment type, manually uploading files may not be necessary. With fully managed MVP installments, the scanner is managed by the Cerberus MVP team, and the scans will be uploaded on your behalf. Manual uploads are only necessary if you opt to manage your own scanning appliance. The Import via Connector tab allows you to set up jobs to import vulnerabilities via API. Notice that if you haven't already configured an API integration, you'll receive an error indicating that there aren't any scan connectors to set up. If you own a vulnerability discovery toolset that Nucleus integrates with, simply click OK and click Add Connector in the top left of the page. This opens up the Connector Setup tab. Within this tab, you'll see a full list of API-based connectors that Nucleus is capable of integrating with. Clicking on any of the connectors provides the necessary instructions for configuration. Wrapping up the last two tabs of the Data Ingest tab group, Import History provides a view of the scans that have been previously uploaded, and Connector Activity provides a view of the previous jobs for any API-based connectors that your project has configured. Next, within the Reports tab group, you'll see the Reports List and Scheduled Reports tabs. Reports List allows you to view any previously generated reports or to cause new reports to be generated. Given how expansive the reporting capabilities are, we won't be viewing the report types individually during this video. Reporting requirements will also vary significantly from one organization to another, so the reports that your users and your administrators find helpful will be based on you. Once you have data in your project, I recommend generating one of each of the report types and deciding internally which of the reports will be most useful for your team. Typically, reports such as the executive brief are favored by project administrators, and reports such as vulnerability details are favored by users that are responsible for the remediation efforts within your environment. Once you've established the report types you'd like to see, the Scheduled Reports tab allows you to schedule recurring times for reports to generate and specify emails for the reports to be delivered to. Next, the Assessments tab is optional, and it's a piece of the console that allows you to post the results from pen tests, compliance audits, security assessments, vulnerability reviews, and code reviews. It's possible to provide auditors or external pen testers with access to the Nucleus platform, such that this tab is the only area that they're able to view. While this isn't leveraged as part of the MVP process, please feel free to utilize the toolset if you feel that it would benefit your organization. Finally, we have the Automation tab. One of the most powerful aspects of the tool, this allows you to perform automated functions within the platform. For example, if we wanted to set up a rule that automatically placed assets within a specific subnet into a specific asset group, that can be achieved within the Asset Processing tab. Note that you could also use the Asset Processing tab to sort devices into a specific group based on their hostname. For instance, if the naming convention for your VDI desktops is VDI-1, VDI-2, and so forth, then we could make a rule that utilizes a wildcard, such as VDI-*, like so. If you decided that you always want critical findings on external devices to be assigned a 7-day due date for remediation, you could do so under the Finding Processing tab. You'd do this by specifying a finding criteria of severity equals critical, and an asset criteria of asset group equals external. On the following screen, you'd specify an action of set a due date and specify a due date of 7 days from now. If you wanted to receive a notification when a due date is missed, you could do so under the Notifications tab by creating a rule with a vulnerability condition of due date past due by 1 day, as shown on screen. Then you'd select your preferred notification method, whether that's email or one of the various communication connectors that Nucleus supports, such as Teams, then save the rule. If you wanted to set up an automation rule that automatically decommissions devices if they aren't seen for a period of 3 months, you could do so under the Asset Removal tab by creating a rule and specifying Deactivate Asset and setting the time frame for 3 months as shown. Rules such as this can help remove the manual labor of tracking which devices have been decommissioned over time. While it is essential to configure this portion of the application, it is something that's also generally completed within the first month of utilizing the console. After that point, the automation rules that you need should already be completed and in place. There usually isn't a need to revisit these rules unless you alter your remediation policies or your environment. Next, we have the Tickets tab. Nucleus has a number of integrations with the largest external ticketing platforms and supports the ability to create tickets based on automation rules. For instance, if your ticketing platform is supported, you'd be able to create a rule that automatically opens a ticket if the remediation deadline is missed by more than 5 days. If integrations like this have been configured for your project, any resulting tickets can be viewed and managed from this page. The Search tab allows you to search through any of the data contained within the platform, ranging from vulnerabilities to hosts, host data, or informational items discovered by scanners. Lastly, we have the Project Administration tab group. The Edit Project Info tab allows you to change the project name, edit the project description, or set whether you would like the project to track assets based on their IP or based on their hostname. Tracking by hostname is recommended due to the tendency for IPs to change within DHCP environments. If your environment doesn't contain any subnets within DHCP scope, tracking by IP won't be an issue either. User management allows you to invite users or remove users from your project. Team management allows you to create teams and add users to those teams. As discussed previously, this allows you to assign vulnerabilities to a team rather than a user. Since connector setup and risk settings have both been discussed previously, this completes the comprehensive project overview. Before concluding, I'll leave you with 2 additional resources that are available to you at any time. First, note the question mark in the top right-hand corner of our page. Clicking this will open the documentation for Nucleus. The documentation is quite thorough, detailed, and easily searchable. Usually, if you're having trouble doing something, there's almost certainly a walkthrough for exactly what you're attempting to do. Second, you'll have been provided the contact information for the Cerberus Security Operations Center during the kickoff phase of your project. If you have any questions relating to Nucleus or MVP as a whole, please don't hesitate to reach out at any time. We'll do everything we can to assist. Again, thank you for choosing Cerberus MVP. We are delighted to be part of your team.